The burning sensation on my cheek was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. Standing in my living room, I smelled the stale whiskey on my son's breath as he screamed for the ranch money again. He had slapped me 5 times, yet he looked at me like I was the monster. By the door, his wife leaned against the frame with her arms crossed, watching my humiliation with a cold, satisfied smirk. My name is Dolores Hart, and at 62 years old, I found myself trembling in the center of my living room in Silver Mesa, New Mexico. The timber walls of the old cabin, which had stood firm against desert winds for decades, seemed to vibrate with the sheer volume of my son's rage. Ethan was screaming about the ranch money again, his voice cracking with a desperation that made my stomach turn. My cheek burned with a fierce, throbbing heat. The physical pain was sharp, but it was the smell that made me nauseous. Ethan reeked of stale sweat and cheap whiskey, a sour combination that filled the small space between us. I looked past his heaving chest to the doorway where Brianna stood. My daughter-in-law was leaning against the frame, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was not horrified. She was not scared. She was watching me with a cold, detached amusement. Her lips curled into a faint smirk that cut deeper than any knife. "You are a filthy old woman." Ethan spat, stepping closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You are so selfish. You dare keep the Hart Ranch money for yourself. That money belongs to us, to a young family with a future. Instead, you hoard it like a dying dragon sitting on gold." I cupped my stinging face and stumbled backward, my legs hitting the edge of my bed. I sank down, unable to hold my own weight. I stared at the man towering over me, searching his face for any trace of the boy I had raised. In my mind, a voice screamed in confusion. "This is the baby who used to cry because he was afraid of thunder. This is the boy who used to hide in my arms whenever a stranger looked at him too long." When did he become this man? For my entire life, I believed that motherhood was a vessel for unconditional giving. I thought the job required you to hollow yourself out until there was nothing left but a shell for your children to use. I believed that any demand for respect or love in return was a form of selfishness. But as I slid from the mattress to the cold hardwood floor, feeling the chill seep into my bones, a sudden clarity washed over me. There is a distinct line between loving your child and letting them grind you into dust. Tonight, Ethan had not just crossed that line, he had erased it. The sharp, jarring ring of the doorbell cut through the tension. "Damn it," Ethan cursed, kicking the leg of the chair near him. He wiped his mouth aggressively with the back of his hand and turned toward the hall. "Who could be that annoying at this time of night?" Brianna muttered, rolling her eyes as she pushed herself off the doorframe to follow him. I remained on the floor for a moment, listening to the heavy silence that followed the opening of the front door. I expected shouting. I expected Ethan to yell at a neighbor or a lost tourist. Instead, there was a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Then, I heard a heavy thud, like dead weight hitting the porch, pushing through the pain in my knees. I hauled myself up and limped into the hallway. The front door was wide open, letting in the cool night air. Ethan was on his knees right at the threshold. My arrogant, violent son was kneeling in the dirt, his hands gripping his thighs. He looked back at me, and his face was drained of all color. The rage was gone, replaced by a primal terror. "Mom, please, I'm begging you." "I didn't know you did." He stammered, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. "I didn't know what you had done. He should have known. I am a simple Irish-American widow who has spent her life covered in red dust, birthing cattle, and watching the vast, unforgiving sky over Hart Ranch. I never wanted a fight. But this story did not start tonight with a slap. It started 3 months ago, on the day I decided to sell everything I owned. Hart Ranch was 120 acres of hard luck and red dust. It was everything I knew. It included the weathered stables that leaned slightly to the left, the deep stone well my father had built with his bare hands, and the endless fields of sun-scorched grass that seemed to catch fire every evening when the sun went down. This was the land where I was born, where I learned to walk, and where I buried my husband, Frank, out past the north fence after a tractor rolled on him. Frank died when Ethan was only 7 years old. I can still see the funeral as clearly as if it were yesterday morning. The wind was whipping my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. But I stood still as a statue. Ethan was pressed against my leg, his small fingers gripping the fabric of my black dress so tight his knuckles were white. He looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, his face streaked with dust and grief. "I will take care of you, Mom. I promise," he had whispered, his voice trembling. That sentence became the cane I leaned on for the rest of my life. I believed him. Because of that promise, I threw myself into work that breaks men half my age. I milked cows for neighbors before the sun came up. I shingled roofs in the dead of July with tar sticking to my skin. And I scrubbed grease off plates at a roadside diner until my hands were raw and swollen. I did whatever it took to keep the bank from taking the deed. Ethan was never like me or his father. He was a good boy, soft-spoken and intelligent. He loved science books about bridges and skyscrapers, and he hated the smell of the barn. He would scrunch up his nose whenever he had to help muck out the stalls. I saw that, and I made a vow to myself. I am going to get you off this dirt. Ethan? I used to tell him while he did his homework at the kitchen table. You are made for bigger things. I was determined to liberate him from the soil that had claimed his father. When he got accepted into the state university in Rio Sol, I felt like I had won a war. Those 4 years were the hardest of my life. I drove my beat-up Ford truck 30 miles every single day to bring him home-cooked food so he could save on meal plans. I took the graveyard shift at a nursing home, changing sheets and turning patients to pay his tuition fees. I remember his graduation day vividly. I sat in the very last row of the stadium, wearing a dress that was 10 years old but pressed clean. When he walked across that stage to accept his degree in civil engineering, my heart swelled so much I thought it might burst. Later, he found me in the crowd and hugged me. We did it. "Mom," he said, beaming. I truly believed that we meant something. I believed he understood the cost of that diploma. But then he met Brianna at a startup seminar a year later. She was a content creator from Phoenix, a girl who came from a world of air conditioning and swimming pools. She was beautiful, but she looked at the world through the screen of her phone. The first time Ethan brought her to Hart Ranch, she did not see the history or the sacrifice. She stood on the porch, looking at the peeling paint and the vast emptiness. "It is so vintage," she said, her voice dripping with a strange mix of fascination and disgust, like a horror movie set. She took a dozen selfies with the horses, but refused to touch the gate latch because it was rusty. I watched her wipe her hands with sanitizer after patting the dog, and I felt a cold, invisible wall go up between us. Over 30 years of manual labor eventually came to collect its debt. My knees began to ache with a sharp, grinding pain every morning, and my back seized up if I stood too long. The doctor was blunt. He told me that if I kept hauling feed sacks and riding fences, I would not be walking in 5 years. That was when the thought first crossed my mind. Maybe it was time to sell the ranch. The idea tasted like bile in my throat. It felt like I was betraying my father and Frank. But my body was giving up, and I needed to survive. I just didn't know that survival would cost me my son. It was a Tuesday evening when I finally gathered the courage to tell them. We were sitting around my small oak dining table, the one with the scratch marks from where Ethan used to race his toy cars. The air was thick with the smell of roast chicken, but I had barely touched my food. I took a deep breath and dropped the news. A tourism group wanted to buy the ranch to build a high-end resort. They had offered me $780,000. The number hung in the air like a ghost. To me, it sounded terrifyingly unreal. A sum of money that did not belong in a life built on coupons and second-hand clothes. Ethan dropped his fork. He stared at me for a second, and then he lunged across the table to wrap me in a bear hug. "Mum, you deserve to rest," he exclaimed, squeezing me tight. "You have worked so hard." It felt warm and genuine, but when he pulled back, I saw it. For just a fraction of a second, his eyes did not look at me with love. They dilated with calculation. He was not seeing his mother. He was seeing a jackpot. Brianna clapped her hands together, feigning delight. "That is amazing." Dolores. "Oh, I hope they keep the old stone well. It is so Instagrammable. It would be a tragedy to lose that aesthetic." A week later, Ethan showed up at my door with a bottle of expensive bourbon. We sat in the kitchen, just the two of us, like the old days. As he poured the amber liquid into 2 glasses, I found myself remembering the summer the refrigerator broke. We had been so poor that we lived out of a cooler for 3 weeks because I could not afford the $50 part to fix it. Now, my son was pouring liquor that cost more than a week of groceries. The clink of the glasses brought me back to the present. "So," Ethan said, swirling his drink, "have you thought about what you're going to do with that pile of cash?" I hesitated, running my finger along the rim of my glass. I was thinking of putting it in the bank. Safe. I need to get my knee surgery done properly. And I thought maybe I would go see the ocean. I have never seen the Pacific. Ethan chuckled, a low, smooth sound. "The ocean is nice, Mom, but money sitting in a bank is dead money. Inflation eats it alive." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Brianna and I have a vision, a green construction company. With my engineering degree and her influence on social media, we could turn that seed money into a legacy. We could double it in 2 years." I felt a sudden weight on my chest. "Ethan, that is a lot of risk. I am old. I need security. Not a startup. It is not a risk when it is family." He pressed, his smile tight. "Don't you trust me? I just need time to think," I said softly. Ethan kept smiling, but I watched his hand on the table. He was gripping his glass so hard that his knuckles had turned stark white. From that night on, the dynamic shifted. The phone calls became relentless. Ethan called me every morning and every evening. He stopped asking how my back was and started ending every conversation with little hooks. "Family builds the future together. Mum," he would say, "investing in your own blood is safer than giving it to a soulless bank." Then came the digital pressure. I was scrolling through my phone one evening when a video from Brianna popped up. She was standing in a hard hat, pointing at nothing, with a caption that read, starting our journey to build the Heart Empire. So blessed to have a generous mother-in-law as our angel investor. My heart squeezed painfully. I had never agreed to be an angel investor. I had never agreed to anything. But the real blow came 3 days later. I walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway and pulled out a thick envelope from the bank. It was a confirmation letter regarding the deposit of the ranch funds. I scanned the document. Confused. Under the account holder section, it did not just list Dolores Hart. It read, Dolores Hart and Ethan Hart. I froze. I stared at the paper until the letters blurred. There, at the bottom, was my signature next to his. It looked exactly like my handwriting. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed a document authorizing joint ownership of that account. The wind howled across the empty fields, but for the first time in 62 years, the cold I felt came entirely from within. I drove to the bank the very next morning with a knot in my stomach that felt like a fist. When I asked the teller, a sweet girl named Sarah, who I had known since she was in braces, to explain why Ethan's name was on my account, she turned the screen toward me. She pulled up a scanned document. It was the stack of papers Ethan had brought over 2 weeks ago. He had called them standard updates for the bank's digital system. It says right here, Mrs. Hart. Sarah said gently. Joint rights of survivorship and full access. You signed it on the 12th. My hands gripped the cold marble counter. I remembered that day. I had reached for my reading glasses, but Ethan had gently pushed the pen into my hand. Mom. Seriously, it is just standard red tape to keep the government happy, he had said, laughing lightly. You trust me, don't you? Just sign, so we can have lunch. I had signed away my autonomy because I did not want to ruin lunch. Before I could even process the betrayal of the signature, Sarah gave me the second blow. The money from the ranch sale had cleared yesterday, and this morning, at 9 o'clock, a transfer of $500,000 had been made to an entity called Heart Horizons LLC. I went home and sat in the dark kitchen. Ethan arrived an hour later, not with an apology, but with a leather binder thick enough to be a Bible. He laid it out on the table. This is the partnership agreement, he announced, his voice vibrating with excitement. We moved the funds to the business account to protect them from tax liabilities. See, you are now a 30% owner of Heart Horizons. 30%, I asked. My voice barely a whisper. But I put in all the money. And Brianna and I are putting in the blood, sweat, and tears. Ethan shot back, his tone sharpening just enough to make me flinch. That is how modern business works. Mom, we provide the vision and the management. You provide the capital. It is fair. The pages were full of words I did not understand. Limited liability, fiduciary duty, operating leverage. I looked at my son, who looked so professional in his pressed shirt, and I felt a wave of shame for doubting him. I signed the agreement. As the ink dried, I told myself that the money was still in the family. But deep in my gut, I felt a hollow sensation, like I had just handed the keys to my front door to a stranger. A month passed, to keep me quiet. Ethan sent me photos of their new office space. He called it a logistics center in an industrial park outside of Albuquerque. Ideally, it was where the construction equipment would be stored. Things are moving fast. He texted, so proud of what we are building. I needed to see it. I needed to believe it was real. So, on a Tuesday, I drove the 2 hours to the address on the contract without calling first. I found the unit in a run-down row of metal warehouses. I peered through the dirty glass of the front window. It was empty. There were no desks. There were no computers. There was no construction equipment. In the corner sat 3 dried-up paint buckets and a folding table with a missing leg. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, cutting through the gloom. There was no business here. There was just air. I drove home in silence, feeling like a ghost in my own truck. That night, I pulled out the contract I had signed and finally read the fine print with a magnifying glass. Paragraph 4 was a death sentence. Class B partners, herein referred to as the investor, hold no voting rights regarding daily operations or expenditure approvals. I realized then that I was legally helpless. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I lost 7 pounds in 2 weeks. Every time I picked up the phone to confront him, I heard his voice in my head. You worry about nothing. Mom, you just don't understand how the new world works. Then came the second surprise. A letter arrived from a credit card company I had never used. It was a bill for a platinum card in my name. I tore it open. My hands, shaking so bad I ripped the paper. The balance due was $20,000. I scanned the list of charges: high-end furniture stores, electronics, a spa in Santa Fe. Ethan had signed me up. He had used my good credit score to open a line of credit for what he called startup costs. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the number 20,000, and realized that my son was not building a company. He was eating me alive. I decided I needed eyes that were not blinded by motherly love to look at the paperwork. I took the thick binder and the bank statements to Malcolm, a retired accountant who had managed the books for the local feed store for 40 years. He sat on his front porch in a rocking chair, adjusting his bifocals as he flipped through the pages I had flagged. After 20 minutes of silence, Malcolm stopped rocking. He looked up at me, his face grim. Dolores, I have to be honest with you, he said, his voice low and serious. Your nephew, or son, he is not building a business. He is frantically covering his tracks. This boy is using your money to pay off personal debts. I felt the blood drain from my face. But the contract said it was for overhead costs. Malcolm tapped a line on the bank statement with a calloused finger. See this transfer here, $50,000 to a luxury dealership in Phoenix. That is not a cement mixer. Dolores, that is a new SUV. And this one, $6,000, labeled as travel expenses. He shook his head. The dates match that week in July. Did he go on a business trip? No. I whispered, remembering the Instagram posts I had scrolled past. Brianna was posting pictures from a resort in Hawaii. I thought they were old photos. They were spending your money. Dolores, Malcolm said bluntly. And you are paying the interest on the credit lines they opened. This is textbook. I am sorry to say this, but you are being taken for a ride. I drove home in a daze. That night, I sat in front of my old computer and typed 3 words into the search bar: elder financial abuse. The results poured in like a flood. I read stories of women just like me, widows, grandmothers, retirees who had been charmed, guilted, and maneuvered out of their life savings by the children they had raised. Every article felt like a mirror. I was not a partner. I was a victim. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I did not recognize. Are you Ethan's mum? This is Lila, Brianna's cousin. I need to meet you. It is about the money and Ethan's company. We met at a roadside diner halfway between Silver Mesa and the city. Lila was a sharp-looking woman, but she looked tired, her eyes rimmed with dark circles. She did not order coffee. She just placed her phone on the table between us. "I am only here because I know what it feels like," Lila said, her voice shaking slightly. "Brianna pulled me into one of her startups 3 years ago. She maxed out my credit cards and left me with the debt while she moved on to the next project. I am still trying to fix my credit score." "Why are you telling me this?" Now I asked. "Because she is bragging about it," Lila replied. She opened her photo gallery and slid the phone toward me. It was a screenshot of a text conversation. Brianna's name was at the top. "We are finally draining the old lady dry." The text read, "She is so clueless. Once the cash is gone, we will put her in a nursing home. Consider it payback for that cheap wedding gift." I stared at the words, unable to breathe. A nursing home. "There is more," Lila said softly. "Listen to this." She pressed play on a voice note. The sound was tinny, but the voice was unmistakable. It was Ethan. "We are going to have to take control of the house in Silver Mesa, too," Ethan's voice said, sounding casual, as if he were discussing what to order for dinner. "Mum doesn't need all that space. It is dangerous for her alone. A room at a care facility is safer, and the sale of the house will cover our next round of funding." The clip ended. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the diner kitchen. I had spent my life making excuses for him. I had told myself he was stressed, or ambitious, or influenced by his wife. But that voice note shattered the last of my illusions. He was not just weak. He was predatory. I thanked Lila and walked out into the parking lot. The desert wind was blowing hard, whipping dust against my skin. For the first time in months, I did not feel the crushing weight of sadness or guilt. As I gripped the steering wheel of my truck, I felt something else entirely. It was a cold, hard knot of rage. It was not directed at Brianna. I expected nothing from her. This rage was for the boy I had carried, the boy who had just planned to sell the roof over my head to fund his lifestyle. "Okay. Ethan," I said to the empty cab of the truck, "you want to play games? Let's play." I drove to Ethan's house in Albuquerque with a manila envelope resting on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. Inside were the printed bank statements, the screenshots of Brianna's texts, and the transcript of the voice note. Part of me, the foolish mother in me, still hoped that when I laid them on his table, he would crumble. I hoped he would cry, apologize, and tell me it was all a terrible misunderstanding. I was wrong. When I spread the papers out on his granite kitchen island, Ethan did not look at them with shame. He looked at them with disgust. He picked up a bank statement, crumpled it in his fist, and threw it back at me. "Are you serious?" "Mom!" he shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "You went behind my back. You have been spying on your own son like some kind of paranoid private investigator, Ethan. The money—" I started, my voice trembling. "You spent $50,000 on a car. You said it was for machinery." "It is a company vehicle," he yelled, cutting me off. "You do not understand how image works in this industry. But that is not the point. The point is that you do not trust me. You never have. You just dangle your help over my head to make yourself feel important." Brianna walked into the kitchen then. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a mug of coffee, looking as unbothered as if she were watching a boring television show. She stood next to Ethan and placed a calming hand on his shoulder, but her eyes were fixed on me with a sharp, icy glint. "Oh, Dolores," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Please stop playing the victim. It is getting old. You use your money to control him. You have done it his whole life. All those stories about how hard you worked, how much you sacrificed, that was just emotional blackmail, wasn't it? You wanted him to feel indebted to you forever. I felt the air leave my lungs. I worked to feed him. I worked to keep a roof over his head. And you never let him forget it. Brianna countered smoothly. You weaponized your motherhood. My hands shook as I reached for the transcript of the voice note. And the nursing home. Was that part of my emotional blackmail? I heard you, Ethan. I heard you say you wanted to sell my house and lock me away. Ethan's eyes widened for a second, but then his expression hardened into a sneer. He looked past me toward the hallway, where Lila had just quietly stepped through the front door, having followed me in to offer moral support. Oh, I get it now. Ethan spat, pointing a shaking finger at Lila. You have been listening to her. That jealous, miserable failure. She is just trying to poison you against us because she wrecked her own life. That comment about the nursing home was a joke. It was dark humor, but you are too simple to get it. It did not sound like a joke, Lila said softly from the doorway. Shut up, Ethan screamed. He turned back to me, looming over the counter. Listen to me. If you keep spreading these lies, if you go around town saying I stole from you, I will sue you. I will sue you for defamation and harassment. You think you have problems now. Wait until you are drowning in legal fees. I will take every last dime you have left just to pay the lawyers. I stared at him. These were words he must have learned from the internet, or maybe from the lawyers he was paying with my savings. Brianna took a sip of her coffee and set the mug down with a deliberate click. There is a solution, Dolores. A way to fix this mess you made. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a hiss. Transfer the remaining $280,000 to the company account. We will treat it as a loan. We will pay you interest monthly. But in exchange, you step back. No more spying. No more questions. You let us build our future without your toxic interference. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the thumping of my own heart in my ears. They wanted it all. They were not asking for forgiveness. They were demanding the last crumbs of my life in exchange for silence. I looked at my son's face. It was twisted with entitlement. I looked at Brianna's smug smile. My hands were shaking violently. But inside, something strange happened. The panic evaporated, replaced by a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. I stammered, lowering my eyes to the floor to hide the change in my expression. I need to go home. I need to think about this. You do that, Ethan said dismissively, turning his back on me to pour himself a drink. Make the right choice. Mom? For once. I walked out past Lila, signaling for her to follow. As I drove my truck back towards Silver Mesa, watching the desert scrub blur past the window, the truth settled over me like a shroud. There was no misunderstanding. Every kind word Ethan had said to me in the last 3 months had a price tag attached to it. He did not love me. He loved what I could give him. And if I had no money left, I would have no value in his eyes. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He wanted the rest of the money, fine. But he was going to have to work for it in a way he never expected. The next morning, I did not cry. I did not pace the floor. Instead, I put on my best Sunday dress and drove into town to see Mrs. Kaplan. She was a lawyer who specialized in elder law, a woman with steel-grey hair and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She listened to my story without interrupting, her pen scratching furiously on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she took off her glasses and looked me dead in the eye. "I will be honest with you, Dolores," Mrs. Kaplan said, her voice raspy from years of courtroom arguments. "Suing him directly for the money he has already spent is going to be a nightmare. The partnership agreement you signed, it is predatory, but on paper, it is legal. The bank authorization. Hard to prove forgery without a long, expensive forensic battle. If we go the civil route, you will bleed money you do not have. So I just let him win," I asked, my hands clenching the arms of the chair. "I just let him take the rest, no," she replied sharply. "We stop playing defense. We go to the authorities. We contact Adult Protective Services and the county sheriff. If we can prove a pattern of financial exploitation, coercion, and elder abuse, this stops being a contract dispute and starts being a criminal investigation." That afternoon, under Kaplan's supervision, I moved the remaining $280,000 out of my personal account and into a blind trust managed by her firm. It was the first time in months my money was safe. Then came the harder part. I asked Kaplan to draft a new will. I sat in that leather chair and watched her strike Ethan's name from every line. I redirected everything: the house, the remaining funds, the family heirlooms to my younger sister in Chicago. It felt like I was amputating a limb, but I knew the rot had to be cut out. Next, I went to the bank. The branch manager turned pale when I showed him the credit card bills and told him I suspected the signature on the joint account form was forged. Banks hate bad publicity, and they hate liability even more. He agreed to flag the accounts and cooperate fully the moment an official police inquiry was opened. But the real turning point was my meeting with Sheriff Nolan. He was a big man who had known my husband, Frank. He listened to the recording of Ethan and looked at the text messages Lila had sent me. When he saw Brianna's name, he frowned. "I know that name," Nolan grunted, tapping his desk. "We had reports from a family in Santa Fe 2 years ago. Similar story. A young woman gets involved with the son, drains the parents' retirement accounts for business ventures, and then vanishes when the money runs out. We could never pin it on her because the parents refused to press charges. They were too ashamed. I am not ashamed anymore." "Sheriff," I said, "I am angry." Kaplan and Nolan laid out a plan that made my heart race. It was a trap, plain and simple. I had to pretend to surrender. I had to lure Ethan and Brianna back to the ranch with the promise of the remaining money. We needed to catch them in the act of coercion. We needed them to threaten me, to force me, to show their true colors while the law was watching. It is dangerous. "Dolores," Nolan warned me, "you have to be in the room with them. We will be listening. But you have to push them to the edge." "I can do it," I said, and I meant it. I spent the next 2 days turning my home into a stage. I bought tiny, wireless cameras and microphones that Kaplan recommended. I hid one inside the old grandfather clock in the hallway, a piece of junk Ethan had always said was worth nothing. I tucked another into the frame of a family portrait on the mantelpiece, a photo of Ethan as a smiling boy. It seemed fitting that his past innocence would be the thing to catch his present guilt. I barely slept. In the middle of the night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, writing out a script for myself. Call him. Sound weak? Offer the money, wait for them to arrive. I rehearsed the lines in the mirror, practicing the tremor in my voice, learning how to look frail and defeated. I was preparing for the performance of my life. I was no longer just a mother. I was the hunter. And my son was about to walk right into the cage he thought he had built for me. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand, taking 3 deep breaths to steady my heart rate. I needed to sound beaten. I needed to sound like the mother he thought he had weak, confused, and desperate for his approval. I dialed the number. "Hello," Ethan answered, his voice impatient, likely expecting a bill collector or a wrong number. "Ethan, it is me," I said, letting my voice crack just enough. "I have been thinking about what you said. I do not want to fight anymore. I am tired." There was a brief pause, and then the transformation was instant. The hostility evaporated, replaced by a sugary warmth that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Mom. I knew you would come around." He cooed. "I knew you would understand that we are doing this for the family." "Did you send the wire? I can't do it over the phone." I lied, gripping the receiver. "My eyes are bad, and the bank app is confusing. If you come out to the ranch, we can sit down and talk properly. I just want to help one last time." "Of course, Mum. We will be there Saturday morning," he said, his enthusiasm spiking. "I will even bring those blueberry waffles you like. It will be a celebration." I hung up and immediately felt the bile rise in my throat. He was going to bring waffles to the woman he was planning to evict. By Friday afternoon, Mrs. Kaplan had everything in place. She had drafted a petition for an emergency protective order and compiled a preliminary dossier for the district attorney. We just needed the final nail in the coffin. We needed him to commit the act of coercion in real time. He has to be the one to demand it. "Dolores," Kaplan told me over the phone, "do not offer it. Let him take it. The jury needs to see his aggression." That night, my computer pinged with a new email notification. It was from Ethan. The subject line read, "Urgent signature required." I opened the attachment. It was a digital document titled Additional Capital Guarantee. I read the legal jargon and realized he was not just coming for the cash. The document included a clause that would allow him to use the deed to my house in Silver Mesa as collateral for a new business loan. He wanted to mortgage my home from under my feet before he even arrived. I called Kaplan in a panic. "Don't sign it electronically," she instructed, her voice calm and sharp. "Tell him your internet is down. Tell him you can't read the screen. Make him bring the paper copy. Make him shove the pen in your hand. That is the pressure point we need to capture." Saturday morning arrived with a grey, heavy sky. I woke up at 5 o'clock, unable to stay in bed. I walked through the silent house, checking my props. I shifted the armchair in the living room 3 inches to the left so that the hidden camera inside the grandfather clock had a clear view of the coffee table. I adjusted the family photo on the mantelpiece, ensuring the lens concealed in the frame was pointed directly at the sofa where Brianna usually sat. "Today is not about losing more," I whispered to the empty room. "Today is about ending it." At 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was Lila. She had sent a file to Kaplan, but she forwarded a copy to me. It was another voice recording. I pressed play and heard Brianna's laughter, high and cruel. "We have tapped the source," Brianna's voice said through the speaker. "The old hag is giving us the rest tomorrow. After this, we put the house on the market and stick her in that state facility off the highway. It is practically a charity case for us." I turned off the phone. My hands were steady now. Out on the street. A white utility van pulled up. A woman in a reflective vest and a hard hat got out, carrying a clipboard. It was Officer Ramirez from Adult Protective Services, posing as a water meter inspector. She knelt by the side of the house, checking the valves. But I knew she was positioned to storm the front door the moment she got the signal. Down the road, parked inconspicuously behind a line of mesquite bushes, was a black sedan. Inside sat Sheriff Nolan and Mrs. Kaplan, wearing headsets linked to the microphones I had hidden in the flower vase and the clock. Testing. 1, 2. I murmured softly as I wiped down the kitchen counter. We hear you loud and clear. Dolores. Nolan's voice came through the tiny earpiece I had tucked under my hair. They just turned onto the main road. They are 5 minutes out. Remember, let them do the talking. You are just the grandmother who wants peace. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm water and sat at the table, folding my hands in my lap. I was terrified, but beneath the fear, there was a strange exhilaration. I was about to give the performance of a lifetime, and for the first time in 30 years, I was not doing it to protect my son. I was doing it to survive him. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway announced their arrival. The show was about to begin. They arrived more than an hour late. When I opened the door, the smell hit me instantly. It was a sour mixture of stale tobacco and expensive gin, clinging to their clothes like a second skin. Ethan stumbled slightly as he stepped over the threshold, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Brianna followed him, her sharp heels striking the hardwood floor with a rhythmic, aggressive clacking sound. She did not hug me. She did not even say hello. Her eyes immediately darted to the ceiling beams and the antique cabinet in the hallway, scanning the room with the predatory calculation of a real estate agent assessing a foreclosure. "Hey, Mom?" Ethan said, his voice syrupy and thick. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, leaning in too close. God, this place. It really takes me back. Remember when I used to run through here with muddy boots, good times? Right, simple times. He guided me to the kitchen table, as if I were a fragile piece of porcelain that might shatter. He sat me down and immediately spread a fresh stack of documents across the wood. The paper was bright white, stark against the scarred oak table. "We need to talk about the final investment," Ethan said, his tone shifting from nostalgic to urgent. "Here is the situation. The company is at a tipping point. If we do not inject this capital immediately, everything stops. And if we stop, the company folds. That means your initial $500,000 goes to zero. It vanishes." I looked at the papers, letting my hands tremble visibly. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller, older, but... "Ethan, I don't understand," I stammered, looking directly at the flower vase where the microphone was hidden. "You want me to sign over the rest of my savings and put the house up. I am scared. Son, I am scared to lose my home. Are you sure this is safe?" Ethan leaned forward, his face inches from mine. The camera in the clock had a perfect profile view of him. "Mom, listen to me closely," he said, emphasizing every word. "You have no other choice. If you do not sign this, you lose what you already gave us. You will be destitute anyway. Do you want to be the reason we fail? You have to do this." Brianna let out a loud, exasperated sigh and slammed her hand onto the counter. "Oh my God, stop coddling her." "Ethan," she snapped. "She is doing that senile act again. Look at her. Dolores. You have been riding on your son's success for years. You act like a victim, but you are just a leech. If you do not sign these papers, don't you dare blame us when we cut you off completely. You will rot in this house alone. She is right. Mom, Ethan said, his voice turning cold and accusatory. You know why I am in debt. You know why I need money, because you never taught me how to manage it. You kept me on the ranch, sheltered from the real world. You made me soft. This mess is your fault. You owe me this. You are just paying for your failures as a mother. I sat frozen, letting the cruelty of his words wash over me. I needed the jury to hear every syllable. But then, the script changed. Ethan stood up abruptly. He walked over to the hook by the back door, where the spare key hung the key I had given him years ago for emergencies. He grabbed it, shoved it into the deadbolt, and turned it. Click. The sound of the lock snapping into place echoed through the silent kitchen like a gunshot. He pulled the key out and slid it into his pocket. We are not leaving until this is done, he said, his voice low. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning raced down my spine. This was no longer just coercion, it was imprisonment. Where is the checkbook? Mom Ethan demanded, looming over me. Don't lie to me. I don't remember, I whispered. Forget it. Brianna hissed. I will find it myself. She turned and stomped up the stairs. I heard the violent sound of drawers being ripped open in my bedroom, the crash of things being thrown to the floor. I found the bank books Brianna yelled from upstairs, and the passport Ethan turned back to me, his face twisted in a sneer. I sat very still at the kitchen table, gripping the edge of the seat to keep from shaking apart. My right hand moved slowly to my left wrist. I found the small, raised button on the side of my medical alert bracelet. It was supposed to be for heart attacks, but today it was for a different kind of emergency. I pressed it once. I pressed it twice. I pressed it a third time. I stared at my son, waiting for the sirens, knowing that the trap had just snapped shut. Ethan grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise. He dragged me to the kitchen table and slammed the checkbook down in front of me. He jammed a pen into my hand, his breathing heavy and ragged. Sign it, he growled, spit flying from his lips. Transfer $140,000 right now to prove you are still on my side? Do it. I looked at the trembling hand he was crushing. I looked at the checkbook. Then, slowly, I raised my head and looked straight into his eyes. I did not see a monster anymore. I saw a pathetic, greedy child. Ethan, I said, my voice steady despite the pain. If you need money that badly, go be a man. Do not be a thief stealing from your own mother. Something inside him snapped. His eyes went wide, turning entirely black with rage. He ripped the pen from my hand and hurled it across the room. Then, his hand moved. The first slap caught me square on the cheekbone. It was a sharp, cracking sound that echoed off the timber walls. My head whipped to the side. I gasped, tasting the copper tang of blood where my tooth had cut my lip. Brianna stood by the refrigerator. She did not scream. She did not rush forward to stop him. She just smirked, crossing her arms as if she were watching a mildly entertaining reality show. Ethan, intoxicated by the sudden rush of power, did not stop. He swung again, and again. You stubborn old hag, he screamed. Why can't you just understand fourth slap? Fifth slap. Each blow was harder than the last. I fell sideways, crashing onto the hardwood floor. My ear was ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. I lay there, feeling the cold floor against my burning cheek, staring at the dust motes dancing in the light. But inside my mind, there was no fear left. There was only a cold, grim satisfaction. Okay, son, I thought, closing my eyes. You just buried yourself with those 5 slaps. Ethan stood over me, panting, adjusting his cuffs. He kicked my leg. Not hard, but with contempt. Get up. He spat. Then he turned to his wife. Brianna, drag her upstairs. Lock her in the bedroom. We will figure out how to get the deed from the bank ourselves. Lock her in. The cameras had seen the violence. The microphones had recorded the intent to imprison. He had just handed Mrs. Kaplan a kidnapping charge on a silver platter. I groaned, hauling myself up by the edge of the counter. I stumbled toward the hallway, feigning dizziness, though my mind was razor-sharp. Just as I reached the archway, the doorbell rang. It was a long, insistent sound. Ethan froze. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, looking annoyed. "Who is it now?" he muttered, marching toward the door. Probably that idiot neighbor. He yanked the door open, still radiating anger and the smell of gin. "What do you..." The words died in his throat. Standing on the porch was a wall of uniforms. Sheriff Nolan stood front and center, his hand resting on his holster. Behind him was Mrs. Kaplan, the bank manager, and right in front was Officer Ramirez from Adult Protective Services. Ramirez looked past Ethan's shoulder. She saw me leaning against the wall, clutching my bleeding lip, the red mark of a handprint blooming on my face. "Step back," Ramirez barked. "Place your hands behind your head." Now Ethan's knees seemed to turn to water. He collapsed right there in the doorway, sinking to the floor. "Mom," he wailed, pivoting on his knees to look at me, tears instantly streaming down his face. "Mom, please. Tell them I didn't mean it. It was an accident." I said nothing. I just watched. Mrs. Kaplan stepped forward, holding up a small black USB drive. She showed it to the sheriff, then pointed to the clock in the hall. "We have it all. Sheriff. The coercion. The assault. The false imprisonment. It is all recorded." As a deputy handcuffed Brianna, who was screaming that this was a mistake, the bank manager stepped into the entryway. He looked down at the couple with professional detachment. "Mr. Hart. Mrs. Hart," the banker said calmly. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, due to the withdrawal of all collateral by your guarantor, your apartment in Albuquerque has been repossessed. Furthermore, the accounts for Hart Horizons LLC have been frozen pending a fraud investigation." Ethan looked up as the deputy hauled him to his feet. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see calculation in his eyes. I saw the terrifying realization that the ranch money was gone, and there was no one left to save him. I watched them drag my son toward the squad car. I did not follow. I simply stepped back and gently closed the heavy oak door. The silence that filled the cabin was beautiful. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and touched the bruising skin on my cheek. It hurt, but it was a pain I could live with. "Enough," I whispered to my reflection. "From now on, the money and the peace belong to me." Thanks so much for listening to my story. I'd love to hear where you folks are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get shared with more people.